Hello there, I'm Steve from Mac84. What's under this blanket, you may ask? Well, it's actually my ultimate Macintosh SE30 color computer. That's right, color. I mean, just look at all these colors. You got green and brown and blue and some more blue. What more colors could you ask for? This all started a few years ago when I got this beautiful Macintosh SE clear case made by MacEffects. And I thought, I want to put something really unique and cool in here, not just a regular Macintosh SE or SE30. I would love to put a Macintosh SE30 in there, but I didn't have an SE30 at the time. All of my logic boards were a little bit sad and rusty. Ugh. But through the magic of waiting forever and finally doing a project that I told myself I would do years ago, we have a beautiful finished product. I set some pretty high goals for myself for this project, and I'm pretty happy with the results. So without further ado, let me show you my Ultimate Mac SE30 Color. Just look at that beautiful clear case. They're actually doing another run of these MacEffects clear cases, which they haven't done in years. So if you are interested in that, I'll put a link below. There's a Kickstarter they're running, and this case is super cool. Besides the case, you could tell this isn't your standard Macintosh SE30. And I went above and beyond to make some custom modifications for this thing. We'll be going over all of the things inside of it too. What makes this thing really unique is the color display. So let's plug it in and see how that looks. There we go, we are all booted up, and this beautiful Macintosh has a lovely color display to go along with it. Now there's a few quirks I discovered while playing around with the Macintosh that is color, but it's not supposed to be color. Some programs like After Dark identify the computer as a Macintosh SE and go, wait a second, you don't need color graphics, you're on a Macintosh SE, and it defaults things to black and white or grayscale. A way around this is to use the I wish I were control panel or app, and what that will do is it can identify this computer as a different machine. So it thinks it's a different machine. So I have it here thinking that it's a Macintosh 2 SI. That does help a few programs and gets around some of the quirks you may experience when running a color display on a computer that was never meant to be color. The add-on color video card I'm using was originally designed to drive an external monitor, but even with the original CRT monitor removed, the operating system still sees an extended desktop space, which I'm sure may be stealing a few CPU cycles. Apple wouldn't release a color-capable all-in-one Macintosh until the Macintosh Color Classic in 1993, which was years after the Macintosh SE30. So I think it's pretty cool that I put a color display in a Macintosh model that never had color. Now the beauty of this thing for me is that we're not running some emulator. There's no Raspberry Pi in here or some little mini computer that's emulating the Mac OS. This is a real Macintosh SE30 logic board. It has a special PDS card video adapter that outputs color that I'm routing to the color display, but other than that, it's an actual Macintosh. No cheap emulation tricks here. This little Macintosh made its way all the way to outside of Chicago for VCF Midwest last year. Big thanks to my friend Sean, who ever so delicately loaded it into his car. It was great having this thing at my booth as a display piece for people to just look at and admire. A lot of people thought it was an emulated computer, so I had a little sign that said all the specs of it and everything. Some people still thought it was an emulated system, but that's what's so cool about the clear case. You can just turn it around and go, look, see, this is how the sausage is made. So let's shut this thing down, and I'll give you a peek inside to show you how all of this stuff works, and show you all the cool contributions from my friends who've helped me along the way. Before we open it up, let's just take a quick look at the sides. So you can see here, no analog board, no CRT. We have our LCD display. And there's a look at the front of it there. And if we turn it to the left, that's the video card we'll be taking a look at. And here's a look at the back. I don't have anything too fancy. I just have an extension cord over here, and I do have a plug that plugs into this that has an on-off switch, but when I went to VCF Midwest, I was sort of rushing to get this thing all finished, and that part wasn't available yet. So this thing doesn't have any screws, so I just have to put my fingernails between the front and the back of the case and just sort of suggest it out, and it looks like I snapped a piece of plastic off of the 3D print that holds the display in, but that's okay. I could 3D print another one. I haven't taken this thing apart in quite a while, so it's actually pretty surprising that thing held for so long. It probably would have been better if I put it face down on this blanket in the beginning. If you want one of these blankets, you can check out my friend Joe's website, jcm-1.com. He has a lot of cool stuff like blue scuzzies and a lot of cool electronic kits and fixes for your old Apple or Macintosh and other computers, but he also has cool things like this blanket. So if you want to check that out, please do. A link will be in the video description. So I'm an idiot, and I actually did put screws in here. It's been so long since I've taken this thing apart. It's been since September, and I'm recording this in March for MARCHintosh. And yeah, this thing has been together for that long that I forgot I put screws in there. So there we go. There it is. This teeny tiny little bit of a frame that held the LCD in place has fallen off, but that's okay. The thing should still kind of sit in there, and there are these hoops around where the screw posts go. So even if it's not perfect, it's not going to fall out. So to best illustrate what's inside of this thing, I'm going to take it a bit apart. So not everything is perfectly mounted in this case, but a lot of it was just to get it ready for the VCF Midwest show. And I will be doing some more improvements in 3D printing some holders and brackets and getting rid of some of this jank tape here. Originally, I wanted to do something different. I had this metal chassis here from one of my old Macintoshes that was a parts machine, and I thought, well, I don't need all of this. I could probably just build something different. After all, I don't have an analog board, I don't have a CRT, and so on. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this is an integral part of the computer. It plugs in to the front of the case here, it has guides for everything I already need, and it would just be a lot of work to bypass that. So what I did was I took one of these frames that I had. Unfortunately, it was heavily damaged. There was a lot of rust and grime on here from a battery leak that happened ages ago on its previous machine. Thankfully, through a lot of hard work and effort, I was able to clean that up. I grinded out and removed all of that rust, and I was able to clean it up pretty well. I used a few different methods to coat this, and I originally wanted it to be a shiny bright silver, but I ended up really liking this darker tone, so I kept that. It's not perfect, and I would clean up a few spots if I could, but you really don't notice it once it's in the case, and I really like how it turned out. Now there is quite of a rat's nest in here with all these cables. I would love to clean this up, I just, again, haven't got to it at this point. But let me give you a tour of all these components. Of course, here is our color LCD display. That's a Mitsubishi unit. We do have this driver board, which is required to drive that display. I'm just going to remove some of this stuff so you can see it. I'm sure I could get a much nicer one, maybe an IPS display, but it would have to be 8.4 inches, and this thing is a native 640 by 480 display, so I don't have to do any video scaling or anything, and it looks beautiful. I'm going to take out this display just because that post is broken, so let's move that to the side for a moment here. Speaking of the screen, a huge thanks goes to Kate of the Macintosh Librarian YouTube channel for helping me adapt an LCD frame for this little Macintosh. I think it came out looking awesome. So here we have the video card. This is a Lapis Pro Color server video card. And this thing is really cool. Let me try and take it out carefully. I have some tape on here just so those contacts didn't short out against the metal case. So this here is a video card made by Lapis. They were a company that made a lot of video graphics cards and solutions for Macintosh computers. This one is dated from 1992. And you can see it's a Pro Color Server 816-2 model. So here we have a little connector here, but what that connector did is it plugged into just a standard old VGA cable, and that's this big honking cable that connects to this board. So here's that video board. It did need some power, so what I did was I soldered on 12 volts from one of the lines of the power supply here, and that's able to drive the display and the required inverter. Taped onto the SCSI cable here, I have a little remote battery that's made by my friend Ron of Ron's Computer Videos. You could get these at jcm-1.com. What's cool about this is it uses a little coin cell battery instead of those more expensive half AA 3.6 volt batteries that the Macintosh computers shipped with. What's nice is it has little spots here where you could extend it, so I have just that, a little cable that extends here where the old battery used to plug into the Macintosh. If I ever had to replace the battery, or if I wanted to just turn the battery connection off, I could easily do so without taking out the whole board. And of course, this style of battery and setup greatly reduces the risk of battery leaks. Here we have an Ethernet card. This is an Asante Ethernet card that was made for the Macintosh SE30. It plugs into the PDS card slot and has a pass-through connector, but this has a 10BASE-T Ethernet connector and a PC-style AUI connector. They are a bit pricey, but there are other options out there like SCSI to Ethernet adapters, and of course you could emulate a SCSI to Ethernet adapter using Wi-Fi with the Blue SCSI version 2. Since the Macintosh SE only has one PDS expansion slot, this Ethernet card and a lot of other cards made for the Macintosh SE have a pass-through card slot. Now this card is also compatible with the Macintosh 2 SI, and in that configuration it would make more sense to have a PDS card pointed this direction, but for a Macintosh SE30, for my purposes, it didn't make too much sense. So I ended up desoldering all of the pins here, removing that original connector, finding a new replacement connector at a different angle to allow me to plug my video card in the proper orientation. Now this big cable here is a SCSI cable. That was the connectivity of choice for internal drives for the Macintosh at that period of time, and it's plugged into the logic board, and that plugs into this floppy disk drive. Now you may be thinking, what the heck kind of a floppy drive requires a SCSI connector? And you'd be right to ask that question. This is no ordinary floppy drive. This is a LS120 super disk drive capable of having 120 megabytes on one disk. This is a bit of an odd duck. It's simply an IDE LS120 drive with this SCSI board on the bottom of it. It is so weird, I friggin' love it. So we have the SCSI connector here, a power connector, and then this IDE cable that just goes vroom and is tucked right in. Now unfortunately, this just wouldn't fit in the Macintosh's case, so I had to make this sort of 3D printed adapter to help mount it. But I may adjust this in the future to have it sit a bit more perfectly aligned with the front of the case. You can put discs in, but ejecting them is kind of a bit of a problem. Next up we have the power supply. This is a Seasonic SS250SU active PFC power supply. They do make a modular version of this power supply, but it was way more expensive than this one. So I decided to just keep the jank here, and I think it actually lends itself a little bit to the project. And as I mentioned before, I have an IEC extension cable that has an on-off rocker switch built into it, so I don't really need to have an on-off switch built into the Macintosh case itself. For this mod, I wired up an ATX extension cable. Don't pay attention to most of the coloring here, I just used the wires that I had in stock. And what I've done is I've extended the only power wires that I needed directly to the Macintosh SE30 logic board. Since I had a lot of wires left over, I decided to solder on a Molex connector and a smaller connector here to power a floppy drive that's usually only for PCs, but since this LS120 SuperDisk drive required that, that came in handy. And of course, we needed to power the display too, so I took 12 volts from this other connector that's built into the power supply. I'm a big fan of doing things modularly, so if I needed to, I could just unplug it and plug it back in. So I didn't want to solder directly to the cable if I didn't have to. Now, although I did want to mount this perfectly to the case, I was running out of options around September when I had to get this ready for the show. So what I did was just use some Velcro, and you know what? That's not going anywhere. So I put one piece of Velcro on the metal chassis here and the other on the power supply, and yeah, that's sturdy enough for my needs. And with all those wires out of the way, you could see the metal chassis that I painted. Next, we'll take a look at the Macintosh SE30 logic board, but with all of these modifications, it can be a bit challenging to remove. So here's the logic board. You could see here's the power connector where we would plug in to the logic board, and we have our remote battery connector soldered onto the battery terminals to provide that with battery power. And then this is the speaker. That is that lovely clear speaker from MacFX. What I did here was run an extension cable, so I didn't have to worry so much about this cable getting snagged whenever I wanted to remove the logic board. On the original Macintosh SE30, that's a bit of a tight situation. You have to remove this connector and this and sort of slide it out, and it's very easy to bend this. So to solve that problem, I gave myself a longer cable here, and I routed it alongside the power supply. You can see here I have a later revision Macintosh SE logic board. You could tell because the CPU is soldered on instead of socketed. Originally at VCF Midwest, I wanted to plug in a Connectix QuickCam webcam to this thing. Those were one of the original webcams for the Macintosh computer. It was a color camera, and I thought that would be great to work on this color Macintosh. Unfortunately, that's when I discovered that the modem and printer ports on this computer were not entirely functional. There was something wrong with a lot of these chips here that just wasn't working. I ended up swapping the chips and doing some very in-depth diagnostics with my good friend Kai Robinson. While talking to this Jedi of old Macs, we removed and desoldered a row of chips here and found out at least one or two of them was faulty via swapping things around and pulling what remains of my hair out to try and figure out what the heck is going on here. At some points it would print using one of those ports, but AppleTalk cannot be enabled on one of those ports. So although some of the lower level functions of those serial ports were working, everything wasn't good until we swapped out everything and resolved the problem. And after all that, I had issues with the camera, but I think I could get that fixed up before the next show. Now to put it all back together and hope not to break it anymore. I've actually had this thing set up as my Global Talk server for a while, and if you don't know what Global Talk is, go to the MARCHintosh website, it explains all that information there. But essentially, this is able to act as a server and talk to other Macs and printers via AppleTalk over the internet, which is pretty cool. One improvement I'd like to make is to remove this long VGA video cable. I don't need it, I only need basically to do a connection like that, but both of these are female-ended ports, so I can't just do that. I would have to get some sort of adapter or a short cable, but either way, that's something that I could work on. I'd like to make some sort of 3D printed mount that would attach these LCD guts onto the back of the screen, therefore it's not sort of just taped on there. While I carefully try and put this logic board back into the case, I want to make it clear that I could not have done this project on my own. I'd like to sincerely thank all of my friends who inspired me during the project and helped make it possible. Specifically Kate of the Macintosh Librarian YouTube channel for helping me with the 3D model to support my LCD screen. My friend Jason from the Gutbomb Tech YouTube channel who helped me endlessly resolve 3D printing issues. My pals Bruce and Elemento who helped me troubleshoot the SE30 logic board. And of course Kai who helped me pore over the schematics and resolve those nasty serial port issues. And then Joe and Ron who helped me with wiring up the power supply. And of course Sean for lugging this beast to VCF Midwest so I could have it at my booth. And of course, thanks to everyone who supported the project along the way. It was great seeing people's comments and reactions in the previous videos, and it was a blast to show it off at VCF Midwest. I'll have it on display at VCF East in April of 2025, so if you can make it out there, you'll see it in person. Unsurprisingly, this thing has been running pretty cool as well. There's not a hot analog board or some CRT generating a lot of heat and power in this thing, and the only fan inside of it is a little fan inside of the power supply. If I wanted to add a case fan to it, I could do that. There is a spot on the back of the case, but for now, it's been running pretty comfortably and I've had no problems. Man, I am just super happy with how this thing came out. I've had it actually sitting on my desk upstairs for a while, connecting to my Global Talk shares and everything like that. And it's just been a lot of fun just using this little machine. Sure, it's only 16 megahertz, but you know, it's color. I could draw pictures on it. I could spam my friends' printers with it. It's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy having an actual Mac on my desk, not just an emulated machine. A few years ago when I started this project, I was very excited for what the outcome would be. And you know what? It's exceeded all of my expectations. This thing is awesome. Again, a huge thanks goes out to everybody who helped me with this project. I sincerely appreciate it. Check out the links in the video description to learn more about the parts that I used in this build. And thank you so much for checking out this video. Please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I also have a Patreon which has exclusive podcasts, behind the scenes, and a bunch of other cool stuff. So if you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll catch you right here next time on Mac 84.